Hi, Michael. Really incredible to see you again. We've only become, we became friends just a few weeks ago. It feels like just a few weeks ago. I don't even remember when that was. In
Yeah,
April or
time is a
March.
way to collapse in on brain,
But I was like really fascinated by you as a person just by seeing you, and then like we started talking, and like things we hit it off extremely quickly in the I remember in the back of the Elm Theater that you own and run, and then I found out that you were a magician.
yes, that was um, yeah, a huge part of my life, up until COVID hit. So, and that did a number, as you know, on so many of the people going out there and performing for the public. So,
Yeah, exactly. But how much is like I know that the performance aspect like in our fields is huge. It's huge like in performing in front of an audience. Like
mhm.
in how far like this is like actually funny. In how far can you be and do you feel like a magician without an audience?
um, that's a good question. I think that you need an audience. I think magic is a magic has to happen between a harmonious relationship or a striving for some communication between another party, and it's that bond that the you know the powers of magic are all about that interaction. So I think magic without a backboard, without an audience, there's trade aspects, just like uh, practicing scales you know,
Hmm.
in your room. But I think ultimately at least for me, what feeds my passion for it is that interaction. And I think without that interaction, um, there's no real reaching out, I guess I should bet as the best I could put it.
Yeah, so it's got to be experienced by somebody else in order to become alive. The magic, which is really fascinating because like as a musician, I think I can and I did and maybe still do kind of like trick myself into a situation where I believe that the music exists even without a listener, which I think, and this is where I'm totally with you, which I think really is just I'm just tricking myself. Because if I wasn't listening, like I know like when you're performing a trick because you are doing it and you're looking at yourself and experiencing yourself from the position of the person that's doing it, that's actually making the magic, let's say. There's like as a musician, you can still in a position where you say, okay, my ears are here, my hands are here, like I can play something and still enjoy it and kind of like pretend that I'm my own audience. But for a magician, that just doesn't work, right?
No, and I think I guess the word that comes to my mind most in that respect would be intimacy, and that the power of intimacy and reaching out beyond yourself and hopefully uh, integrating with something outside of yourself is that proverbial, the sum is greater than, I mean, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. I think that, and that fuel of everyone, as a musician, I'm sure you feel, is every once in a while you're in that zone, that somehow the real magic or something comes in by that union and that experience that you tap into something. And I think you need that, that backboard once again, that audience, and that audience needs to be as into your music and participating in the whole experience as possible, to open that door. I would think.
And is that really the case with magic or stage magic that the audience has to have goodwill towards you, let's say, or has to be like engaging in an
Well,
equal
that's an
relationship,
interesting
or? or do you have more power, let's say, over the audience by being the magician?
Well, that's a good point because, in all honesty, I never got into magic for a one to fool people. So, and that is a big challenge is that, that's you have some sociopathic tendencies. Um, you really shouldn't be getting off on that. Hey, I got you, I fooled you, you know, and so that's been a huge challenge in myself is how to sculpt shows and experiences that this is a sharing of an art form, not me running an ego trip and being an alpha beta person and trying to one up you because quite honestly, um, some people would get very adversarial, and I've had experiences with that where the magician is viewed as a predator, by certain types. You get some you're doing a corporate event and you get some inebriated people, and they're going back to their fraternity days, and all of a sudden, they're on stage and they need to act out in certain ways, and that's always an interesting um, or challenge where they're trying to one up me, and if I went up them, that's kind of a lose-lose situation because if you're making a fool of somebody on the stage, which I could do, would one up that situation, but there's a tremendous amount of residual resentment built into that. And as far as the rest of the audience might chuckle and might get along with it, but the person up there, there's a kernel of resentment in there for most people, especially a more masculine mentality, and that's something that doesn't feed me at all. And so, going back to the original point, it's always been a challenge of how do I produce a show which is really hard in magic to be as euphoric and inspirational as a music performance. I mean, when you're doing a performance of music, you can ultimately uplift everybody, and everybody feels like they're part of something that you gave them a gift, rather than, looking at you as, okay, you got me. All right, fine. You won. So that's a challenge. And that,
Yeah,
but you
that
don't, you don't really experience that with children as much, you
yeah,
know.
yeah.
So, and then
Yeah,
children
I
are
mean,
typically more enjoyable. So,
yes. I mean, you just used the word resentment, and it's fascinating. Like, because as a musician, like usually you don't think about these things that you actually could be triggering people in a negative way with music, or let's say like not even necessarily with the music, but with the craft aspect of things. And that's sort of like, okay, if I was, and I'm not really a competitive person, but when I saw you do those little tricks for me there, which I'm not asking you to do anything on camera, but it was if I was a competitive person, I could see how I could get jealous, or how I think, oh, I would like to be able to do this, or like, and not realizing, and this is like the point I want to make, that maybe you spend like decades rolling coins in your fingers or whatever,
mm.
like where I get this kind of comments after shows a lot where people say it looks like it's completely effortless and like you don't have to look at the fretboard, blah blah blah, all these things. And only in that moment when I get this kind of feedback, I realize that the dedication to a craft, no matter what that is, could even be like a barista in in a coffee house or something, right? Like eventually makes you stand out in a way that is not really understandable for some people.
I totally agree with that. In fact, I would, the there's a very small percentage of magicians that made an income doing magic. The vast majority are hobbyists, and a lot of great magic comes out of hobbyists. But at the same time, the Venn diagram of what you're talking about, I have much more in common with you as it that I do with a hobbyist magician.
Mm-hmm.
As far as because the hobbyists don't have to deal with, hey, am I speaking to the back of the house? Did I not get paid by my agent? Did I, all those variables where the stage you're on stage is the smallest part of your
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
craft.
Mm-hmm.
And that sweat equity about pushing through boundaries and plateaus. And as a musician, I never thought that as a young kid, when I want to be a magician, I'd have a day like, oh my God, I got to do another magic show this afternoon, you know. Um, but you have to push through that, and you have to go through plateaus, and all that I think adds to your character and adds to that commonality where I would have much more in common with somebody like you, who are a professional tuba player, than somebody who goes to their magic meetings and then afterwards they go to their golf club and they have whatever. And
Mm-hmm.
that's great what they are, but there's that level of push and that level of something that I think is that bond between, like you said, anybody who, it brings back a story of Neil Peart, the drummer.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, he wrote a book called Ghost Rider after his daughter and his wife. I don't know if you've read that, but his daughter and his wife died, passed away, and he did a lot of meanderings. And something was very moving in that to me, where he's riding across the country, and apparently he had a huge interest in birds, and he was so excited to see this renowned ornithologist, and to meet this guy. So here's this, internationally famous millionaire rock star who can't wait to see this person who has this other expertise.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's sort of you know, being appreciated for that all the boundaries that you have to push to get to be at that point is almost a sacred bond. When you do meet people like who have been through that, no matter what journey they went through, you kind of feel almost a soulmate relationship, I would think, if that's not too esoteric.
No, no, absolutely. And I think it's kind of funny. Like I remember times as a teenager when I was sort of like watching a TV talk show, like German TV, and they would have an interesting guest, like Klaus Kinski, let's say, right?
Mhm.
A crazy guy, but still, nobody ever asked him a question that I where I would be actually interested in the answer. Like people never went to the place where they asked, "How do you do what you do?" Like, and so and that's sort of like a reflection of like being interested in the expertise of other people, and but even more than that, like not just interested in the expertise but also interested in their process. How did they get to where they are? And when we're talking about performance, like in your case, like performance, there is all the questions like, okay, how do you focus, right? And especially as a professional, you say like we need to function no matter what. You may have had just like a call that your mother died or whatever, and you have to go on stage,
Exactly.
and that's really has become my main interest really, and that's kind of like what I saw in you actually. Interesting
Well, I
enough, like
appreciate that.
immediately, I saw that there's just like this something there that is so developed that it is almost independent of the person.
Well, and I think that comes, just as a purely back to your trade aspect, is that as you know that when you have those horrible experiences right before you went to work, you got in a fight with somebody, or you know,
Hmm.
you just, you had a busted water pipe at home, and who knows what's going on. I think that ability to go on autopilot and perform can only come through like going back to the original discussion, performing,
Hmm.
because I can read all the books in the world about how to drive a car, but until I'm driving, you know, I might be able to drive perfectly with that reference manual, but as sort of something, you know, somebody pulls out in front of me or something that I have to go in that instinctual mode, I'm lost. And so the same thing that only comes from that constant participation. And I think that's a huge measure of the difference between a professional and an amateur is that when, if you have a string break on your instrument or, something
Yeah.
is how do you do, you don't just break down and, you adapt you. And sometimes that another conversation going on, but some of my uh, strongest routines have come through happy accidents like that. If you want an example, I can give you.
Yeah.
There's a really common. Once again, excuse my voice. Uh, funny, humorous audience participatory uh, effect, where it's basically you take a sponge rabbit and you vanish it, and all of a sudden it appears in the other person's hand. Okay. Actually, the effect is you have one, they have one. You vanish yours, it's gone, and now it's, oh my gosh, in the other person's hand.
Hmm.
So I was doing a corporate event, and lots of people in the crowd, and the woman gets up, and she was a little inebriated. So when I turned around, she had taken her rabbit and put it in her cleavage.
Hmm.
Okay. But I had already loaded two rabbits in there, so she thought she was only putting one in there.
Okay.
Okay, so I turn around and I'm going, it's gone, and she opens her hands trying to one up, oh, it's gone, ha ha ha, and he reaches in her cleavage and she pulls out one of the rabbits. Well, I knew she had another one there, so I vanished it, and she went and she, you know, that was a purely happy accident. But playing those moments, and that's where the magic is the strongest. I can remember who came up with the analogy in magic where you're walking down the street and somebody goes, um, you go, hey, you watch this, boom, you create a tuna fish sandwich. Oh my gosh, how did you do that? Now, that's a magic trick. But lack of a better word, a miracle would be you're walking down the street and your person with you goes, geez, I'm really hungry. I'd like a tuna fish sandwich. Then you create it,
Yes.
you know. I've had many happy accidents, which I'm sure that is a huge part of being a recording artist. Of all of a sudden you find yourself going, oh wait, that sounds kind of cool, So
Absolutely,
you
absolutely.
know,
And it comes down to like every single detail or even note that is not just a wrong note, but even like a slightly off timing or something. Like it's just so important. And like what you just described, like this idea of nestedness in magic tricks. I kind of like the idea that like okay, say you have something like I don't know any vocabulary about like how
okay.
these things work or whatever, but let's just imagining like you give an illusion and then people kind of like realize that was just an illusion, but then in the next step you kind of like bring them back to the level, it was actually an illusion. Or like you can kind of like go back and forth between, or even like yeah, literally back and forth between these poles of certainty and uncertainty, let's say. And like a whole spiel like we can be to kind of like lead somebody like back and forth on this continuum, so that it's like that in the end they don't really it's a little bit like I mean like in a more fixed format like a film, which has like two or three different mind fucks in it or something like that, where suddenly everything appears from the other direction or the other perspective and things like that.
A dream within a dream,
Yes,
yeah,
yes.
yeah. It's no, you're perfectly, I think about that as well, and I think a lot of not to be pretentious, but a higher part of being an artist in some way is I think most people have a problem embracing mystery. Mystery it's scary. And I think that having somehow introducing mystery, whether it's a new musical progression, that they've never gone to, or or a magic trick that says gets you to question your world a little bit, open your mind a little bit. That's something that I used to do a lot of tarot card reading as well. I would get hired by a lot of high schools and
Hmm.
colleges and corporate stuff, and my interest in tarot was much more psychological. Like Carl Jung was very much into tarot, Joseph Campbell, and whatnot. And the ultimate goal to me was if it gives you something to think about that you normally wouldn't think about, then that's just fine. That's all I can do, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, that's what I call the oracle.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And like just quickly going back to what you were saying about like the lucky accident.
Mhm.
In a way, that is really the magic that can happen if you're performing. Let's say, so if you're making yourself vulnerable to execute something perfectly, let's say, and it's basically you're actually inviting the mistake or whatever to happen. And if you have some sort of like the luck that there is this serendipity happening of some sort, like that really elevates performance. Or like when I'm making music for a film, let's say, right? And I realize I make this music. I have seen the film, I've seen the scene. I make some music. I put the music underneath it, and I see everything syncs up in ways that I couldn't have planned. Right? It's
Yeah,
just it's just
in fact, I've been thinking a lot about that just recently, where I came across some sort of uh, article about how it was some neuroscience um, expose, and how the brain consciousness isn't. There's all the studying is that there's something in the brain that is actually more acts more as an antenna rather than something within itself. So to me, um, I'd always wonder, like, how come, you have these classic songs that were written by, Stairway to Heaven, or, you know, whatever, how many people, then these people are kids, were 19 years old, early 20s, but they stood the test of time. How is that? I'm a much better musician than I was when I was 19. And maybe because they were more tapped into that antenna, so they were, I mean, how many writers you read that they say they didn't write the book? They were just a conduit. And so they tapped into something. And on a side note, I'm a lifelong, bedroom uh, musician. And I've thought lately that, I'd love to, for my own, hobby aspect, I'd like to produce music that if I re-listen to, I go, I have no idea how I did that. And I can't do it again, you know? And that would be like, whoa, I was tapping into something that I can't replicate. And if I try to replicate, it might be, as a surface. That's like the difference between, I think, some like a cover artist and the real artist. There's some
yeah.
tangible something there that is beyond the craftsmanship, that those nonverbals, those something that I guess rooted in individuality, that our caveman brain maybe picks up on, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I think it's not even individuality, it's universality,
Okay.
right? It's something that just is. It just is, and it doesn't matter if the person that creates it, let's say, is a trained musician or a trained magician for that matter, or it's somebody who's just lucky, or somebody who's well trained over decades. I think like a very good example for me is always improvisation. Like I'm
Right,
actually
exactly.
currently an improvisation course currently, and a lot of people come into the course like thinking, oh, I need to know which notes I can play on that chord and blah blah blah, things like that. Which scales do I need to learn? Blah blah blah. That's one approach. But really, like what improvisation really is that's improvisation. Like anybody can do that. You can make an action. You can just kind of create a sound. Like if it's about music, you can just make a sound. You don't need to have any training for that. You can pick
Exactly.
any, yeah, and that's really like what shows that the art, like what we call art, really is not something that is elusive for like amateurs. It's the opposite. Like anybody can create and should be able to create. And for me, because I'm also just like you, somebody who has like studied my craft, like for I've studied it for decades, but I still want to be able to have the innocence and the absolute kind of like freedom to just be intuitive in my interaction with the world or with
Well,
music for that matter.
yeah, I mean, 2 points. You're totally right that because there is no there's no cap on your level of knowledge, and ability. I mean, you reach obviously a level of competence that you can perform and share your craft, but there's always a higher level. And so I think that once you get that mindset, um, there's a lot of humility built into that, because you can always, you're never, you know, there's always a place to go. And sort of as a side note, I used to be a photographer as well. I did that concurrently, but I was very much into the art school photography and the difference between black and white and color. That color sort of always has to be correct. If it's a little bit off, you kind of go, your brain goes, this doesn't feel quite right. But then that's saying there's many shades of gray. So in that gray, and as a musician, I would think what you're talking about is you just take musicians that are, I don't know, slow hands like a David Gilmour, um, who just can bend that note just right, and there's no secret about bending a note, but there's something that I think about it like that scene from Star Wars where at the end he's blowing up the Death Star and he has to use the Force. So
Mm-hmm.
there's something you just, you're bending and you sink in and you got it, and then booms. And that I think whatever that is a very euphoric feeling if you can tap into that. You know?
Yes. Yeah, the example you gave with, say, Stairway to Heaven or let's say Hotel California or like these huge songs that were written by relatively young people. I think, yes, you're right that there is sort of like the antenna aspect of the people that actually bring make the thing come alive. But at the same time, I think it's also that the antenna is not just an individual or the band. I think it's also like the world. Let's say like so if something gets broadcast like in the 70s on radio, right? Or TV, the people that hear it, they sort of like become part of that network of antennas where the reason why we give such value, let's say, to those songs is because they got distributed across minds, let's say, if we want
Oh,
to
I
think
agree.
of minds.
The collective unconsciousness.
Yes.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there's something that, in my field, Houdini, who was the first international superstar, and he was this little guy who was a good magician, but he was ultimately known as an escape artist. So, but his time where he was performing was during the Depression, and there was a lot of systemic potentially what you're talking about, that here's this little guy that can break out of anything, and everybody else, the whole economy, the whole, so much of our, of the world was in a feeling of in a box. And as a metaphor, this person tapped into something, and Houdini probably couldn't do that in different times, you know.
Yeah,
So that hits something that a universal, you know, uh, message that was inspiring, and
absolutely.
maybe consciously we didn't even know that, but there's something hitting at that level saying we need this,
Yes, exactly.
you know.
So that's where sort of like the readiness, let's say, of the receiver, let's just say, is again, we spoke about that earlier, is like a really important part. Like, is the world ready for this idea? Is the world ready for this message?
You're
And
right.
where some sort of like feedback loops then starts happening that turns like a song or an idea into something that kind of persists and grows over time. Yeah.
And I think that even goes into, I don't know, you could even bridge into politics, is that, you might have a civilization that is fairly evolved, and they all of a sudden want to come into some, another, country, another, that has, is not ready for that yet, and you can't just jump in and say, okay, you guys are all going to be blah, 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 Democrat, blah, blah, but they have, and, maybe centuries of, of superstitions or religions, or just customs, that we can't just bully ourselves in,
Yeah,
and say,
yeah,
do
yeah.
this because, and then what's the effect is typically, not to the good. So,
It's a little bit like isn't it like Star Trek? Like they have these whatever they call the first
oh
rule
yeah,
or
you're not
first
supposed to
directive.
eat.
Yeah,
Exactly, exactly. Yeah, yeah, because, and that because, but then that once again goes into who are we to, but then that, of course, obviously is related to other things like, you know like, just domination and whatever. So that's a little off topic, but
yeah.
no, I think a lot about that. I think Picasso's trite saying of, or much used saying, mentality of, he spent his youth trying to paint like an adult, and his adult trying to paint like a child. So that receptivity of, that's a huge topic that I'm very much invested in, is the language in general. Um, I mean, humans have been around, were around before language, before words, and, I look at you take a dog from Berlin, and you bring it over here and introduce it to a dog in New York City, and they're going to talk because they're both dogs. There's a primal dog language. So to me, it doesn't make sense that there's not a primal human language. If you brought somebody from Austria and you brought them into Zimbabwe, and are they just going to look at each other and go, but I think that from birth, we're brainwashed to want to package everything into a nice word. And, the words are very powerful things because, if you see a tree, the tree just told you what it was visually. I don't need to say tree to myself. And if I do say tree to myself, all of a sudden that brings in a lot of baggage, and a
Yes.
lot of, maybe it reminds me of me falling off a tree. It means me, or a beautiful situation, whatever, but it's taking me away from that immediate experience because I packaged it in a word, and that word is subconsciously connected to me in my history, so that is something that's very intriguing to me, of, breaking down. And that's where I think instrumentation and music can break that break that, perversity, to just want to just be a label lover and just put a label on everything and package it in a nice little package.
Absolutely, you know. And like the prime example that I use with my students is that if I say the notes C, E, and G, most people that know about music theory, right, they will say, "Oh, that's a C major chord." And I say, "No, listen again. It's the notes C, E, and G. I have C, E, and G. Those are already labels, right? So why would you want to apply another label to it where I just told you what it is? It's just the notes C, E, and G. If you're labeling it, you're kind of like just making the world smaller in a way. Like that's what labels do. They kind of like create a smaller world, and they also create potential for misunderstanding.
That's
And
interesting.
yeah,
Is
I
there
mean,
something about like I can't remember what musician, I don't know if it was Stanley Jordan or talking about, I might be totally wrong, but it just, chords are merely just manipulations of a scale. So it's really the scale. You're just messing with it. It's not that. There's just one just but you're getting out of the mentality of this is a scale, not the package of just that, if that makes
yeah, it's like really like thinking in terms of units and chunking things. So, for
Okay.
example, you could say that you could use the words C, E, and G, but you could also say, okay, here I'm going to play a note on whatever instrument, and this is what that note sounds like. And then, like, I know it is the key that is supposed to be the note C that I've just played, but it has that sound. So that would be like, sort of, let's say, like the closest to what it really is the sound.
And getting and
That
sculpting your brain to work in the language of sound rather than
rather than
than
because you were saying that like what happens as a baby that we get sort of like we're being that universal language is being taken away from us because we're learning words, we're learning sounds, we're learning labels in order to acquire language, a certain language, and in order to communicate with each other. But at the same time, we do that at the expense of the pure experiential,
exactly.
uh, you know.
And even languages itself, I mean, just the nuances of inflections and whatnot. If you have, Germanic blood in you, the language probably sprung from a natural physiology of your, you know, so all of a sudden you're a transplant and, you're living in, where, Brazil and you're supposed to be speaking Portuguese. Well, that might not fit your biorhythms or whatever. It might there was something that is not a natural way of expression in any way. You
It's
know,
it's absolutely amazing because like this is like tying into the physical aspect of being who you are, right? And me, like born in Germany, right? But I've spent a lot of time in the USA. So let's say like I started spending time in the USA in like over 20 years ago. Lots of time in the USA. And at the beginning, I remember that it took me about 1 or 2 days where for 1 or 2 days I felt comfortable speaking English, and my muscles, they were able to
okay,
produce those sounds. But after 2 days, my body was exhausted, and I couldn't produce those sounds
that's
anymore.
interesting.
And now it has changed. But it still happens, but it takes weeks now, like 6 weeks, let's say. And suddenly I lose my my body falls back into the German-speaking pattern, in order, and I remember being on the road, like literally rehearsing my R's, right, like which is
Right.
a sound that doesn't exist in German.
That's really interesting. Hey, Mark, can you put a pause on this for 2 seconds?
Of course.
Oh yeah, hold on. Let me just address real quick. Um, yeah, that's really interesting about um, just how, like you said, the maybe the micro muscles, have a problem, not just in the intellect. That's another point. I think that I can't remember what so many poets and whatever said the the best way for to become more empathetic and open-minded is travel.
Hmm.
And I always feel like if I go to like another country and I can't speak the language, there's something very there's an excitement that you're trying to access the communication without the language. And I think there's something very and this goes on a lot of tangents, but I think a lot of depression is related to not having that connection to the bigger something, you know. And I think that what's that saying that if you're busy rowing the boat, you're too busy to rock it. And so when you're actively in another country or walking through the woods and having to deal with maybe there's bears walking around or a snake I might step on or a jagged rock. I think that actualizes something that goes into something that says life's not just you're a participatory person and being in that bigger something is beauty. It's wonderful. It's fulfilling, rather than I can just put myself in my box. And then ultimately you're just mentally masturbating. But having that, once again, going to another country or where you have to say, I can't, where's the bathroom, baño? And it's amazing how, as you know, it's like how you can interact so well in other countries just by, pointing. And that gives me thought is what are languages, that everybody would understand, a point, a look, a smile, and that's really interesting to me about it. But at the same time, beyond the academic interest, I think that there's something availing yourself to those other communications is something very, very uplifting, I guess I should say.
It is. However, like you think about it, like okay, we have verbal communication, like the language that we just talked about, right? And then you were bringing in like gestures, let's say, right? But like it turns out that even those are not universal. Like where
Right,
the
exactly.
where this means yes in Indian culture, right? Where for us it's a no, and it's like
Your
it's
smile is an
reverse.
aggression.
There's yeah, like exactly like in Russian culture, like if you're smiling too much, you're stupid. They think you're stupid and stuff like that, right?
Or I think I
And
think I think chimpanzees is a sign of, I'm going to attack you,
yeah, yeah, something like that, right? Yeah, or
I'm
staring
showing
at
my
people,
teeth,
like where in Germany, like we look at each other, and I know that like expats here in Germany, they think it's creepy that we actually stare it. They call it staring, but we don't stare. We just look at each other, you know.
Yeah, well, Americans, not all, but it's interesting that it depends where you are in America. But there's a lot of hey, we just don't talk about it, and we don't. I think I remember meeting somebody who was from your region of the world, and they said that when they came here, when we said, "How are you doing?" that was very offensive because that was something that a doctor would ask. So, okay, well, my gallbladder's or whatever. It's like, no, you're supposed to say fine, you
Yes,
know.
yeah,
And
yeah.
but I think that intimacy where you're quite, I mean, I always tend to jive more with the East Coast of the United States with uh, let's say because they tend to be more in your face.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be very offensive to certain people,
Mm-hmm.
as far as, hey, I'm asking you a question. The question isn't loaded with anything other than I'm asking you a question. I'm being direct about it. I'm not trying to put you into your place. I'm not trying to demean you. But that, like you said, that language of that getting into that place where we can actually have a conversation. You're right. That's very, um, and I made tons of mistakes in my life where my assumptions based on my growing up people would take things. Well, look at in our world right now with social media, being sarcastic in social media is not a good thing.
Mm, mhm.
You know?
Yeah, and I think like the like understanding misunderstanding are so close. Like this is like something that really, if we when we're young, right, and we go out into the world, we sort of, and I can't speak for everybody, like what I think it's a general pattern is we sort of like take our understanding of the world and we kind of like imagine it, we project it onto everybody else. So we kind of like believe that, like I would believe that you're actually seeing the same thing that I see, right?
I think
Or
no, no, you're totally right. I with pithy sayings that always stick in the back. I don't think Marcel Duchamp addressed that about how,
yeah,
a painter can paint whatever they want with their expectations, but the audience will bring their history to the painting, and you can't have that expectations,
yes,
and I think I mean Alfred Stieglitz, the photographer, had he would lay on his back taking pictures of clouds, and he would try to have a feeling, and I called them equivalents, where he wanted to be able to show this picture and the person feels music or whatever. Um, I don't know if I don't think that can ever be an expectation. Um, you know,
yeah. I
Beyond
think
it, unless you're a tradesperson, fully, you're doing it. I'm building a bridge or I'm building a cabinet or, I'm fixing your plumbing. No,
yeah, I think like language is really a very good model, let's say, for a lot of things like that are like where we wouldn't think of language first. Like what I was saying, for example, I think identity and language is very much how do you say it? Like interlocked. For example, being very direct, like in German, in what we call Hochdeutsch, like standard German, right, is possible because standard German is not really, you can't localize. You can't say, okay, person speaks high German, and you could say, oh, this person could be from Munich or could be from Hamburg. They could be like almost 1,000 kilometers apart, right? And they would you. That's why they can use language in a way that is sort of like not offensive. You could say no, right, without it being like a step in the heart. But just imagine like you're somebody who speaks a local dialect, right? And language is sort of like part of who you are, and you then use like certain words that trigger something in you. It's
exactly. Yeah.
really difficult. And I think this, and because I lived in Austria, where it's like where the language is very localized. You have like valleys which are very close to each other. You speak different languages, almost different, like different words, different dialects, and in order to actually be who you are, you have to speak your dialect. Otherwise, you can't really be part of the community.
What
And
do you think a lot?
yeah,
I'm sorry. Do you think a lot of that is related um, to fear? In other words, it all depends on how you're brought up and how you're educated. By a child, I guess my example, maybe it's a little bit off topic, is I used to never be afraid of flying, but then I have a degree in engineering and I know how a plane works, you know. So all of a sudden it's like, okay, there's a lot here that I know about, you know, and I think that, but I'm also locking myself in my own little education, my little box or whatever. But I think going back into, what you're talking about, coming into situations, I think about, once again, I might be going off topic, where I guess the plight of the dodo, I think they had no natural predators. So when we came, to the island, they just would, why, hey, how you doing? And I just like, number dodo, but they had that. So it has to be tempered with, you need to have that, but at the same time, you have to be realistic too about who your audience is, you know. But going back to what
Yeah,
you're
I know.
saying,
I think that's really like in a way that encapsulates what it means to be human, right? Like, and or even to be alive. Let's just put it that way, because like
that
any
balance.
any human any being uh, has to have some drive to stay alive, right? There's got to be something, and even if it's just hunger, or and like, and that is really the for most behaviors, really, that's the tipping point. Like,
And
where,
then
on which side of that feeling am I, right?
right. And without that hunger and that and I mean with if you have the hunger and you have to surmount that, you have to also be intimate with the world.
Hmm.
And I think that's where the people that never have the hunger can sometimes turn into monsters. You know, the enabled people that, you know, because they've never had to develop those, they've been gifted everything. And that assumption that the world just they show up and breathe and they get something, you know. So, but they have to have that balance of, you know, without that tragedy and with that hunger, without that journey of having to surmount things, you
Hmm.
can't. Going back to the original part of the conversation, you can't actualize maybe your individuality, you know, at certain levels. So that balance of, and so much like you're saying, it's just so. I mean, I just think that, you know, coming as a American going to Germany, it's like, you know, okay, why are you staring at me so much? What did I do? Okay, what's the, and I mean, and here, one of my favorite stories that to people who know me are sick of hearing is like, you know, a lot of people that are uh, in the United States, it's a big country, a lot of different municipalities and mentalities are like, well, New Yorkers are so obnoxious. They're really obnoxious. And it's like, and I remember going to New York one time, and we came out of I don't know, I'm at Penn Station. I can remember where it was, and I, you know, I'm not, I have no problem asking people where something. I asked some guy where something where at whatever gate, whatever it is, and he looks at me, and goes, "What's your problem? You don't know where it is." You know, and you know, with the attitude of like, you're a stupid asshole, you know, idiot. And he goes, let me show you. And he walks like the whole journey and goes, there it is. You know, so it's like, you know, that was such a beautiful, you know, whereas,
Yes.
you know, another place would have been like, uh, sorry, you know, anybody peed in their pants, you know. So,
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And
and, you know,
and and it's like that the range of human expression is just really wide, and somehow I feel like we are being taught only like a small slice of the possibility, and we're also kind of like learning to react in a specific emotional way, like you were saying, like this guy, how he talked to you. But you wouldn't really even think about the fact that this is just the way he speaks. This is his way of being nice, maybe, right? Or his way of showing you that he takes you seriously. Because that's also something that I've realized, that a certain forceful reaction usually means that, like, you're being taken seriously.
right. But I don't know if, but it also means that you have to be with people that are predisposed to want to think,
Yeah.
you know, and not want to, I don't know. I mean, I can get cynical. I just find that, I know, and I think about it, I don't like to, but I think a lot, you know, I don't know whether it's DNA or whether it's education, and I'm sure it's a lot of both, is that, um, you know, I think that's always been a problem with intellectuals or people that are, you know, academically minded, you know, myself, you know, I think I throw myself in that, is that assumption that people want to think in that respect, where I think a lot of people are looking more to join, and that's what fulfills them, is being part of a team, that identity, that want to be, that tribalism, that want to be, so the issue is a moot point where they're not looking to. integrate on a certain level. And maybe that being really cynical about it, but I think that is it a nature nurture thing? I mean, we talk a lot about nurture, but you're not allowed to talk about nature because that's very non,
Hmm.
PC. And I think there is, I don't know, I think a lot of it, you know, to me is if we really own the fact that we're animals, we're intelligent monkeys, and just like any other animal, we have certain proclivities, and you have a batch of kittens, and everybody knows you might have a kitten that, oh, that's horror, and that same batch you're going to have, oh, that's a loving, and so that I think a lot of that can be socialized out. But then we've all seen animals. I'm sorry, um,
And again, like maybe we don't really have to use labels, because that. But what we can say is, and this is what I said earlier, is just become aware that not everybody who looks like me thinks and feels like me.
and that, and
Like
self humor with it. I
the
mean, that's really
variation,
important.
the variation we have, like in humankind, let's say, is just huge.
And that's why I find it so important to develop the inner strength to push past the initial facade,
Hmm.
because you know how many you know hey, you looked at me, you stared at me weird, and I'm
Hmm.
going to go home and go, okay, well, okay, did I cut my mustache weird, or I mean, why is he looking at me? Do I remind him of somebody
Uh,
that killed his mother? I mean, I don't,
mhm.
I don't, why do you he's looking at me really weird? Whereas, like, no, you're just looking at me because you're looking at me, and
Yes,
and
yes.
and if I in that moment said, well, why are you looking at me so? And you said, no, no, I'm not. This is the way Germans are. And then the more I spent time with you, the more I go, oh, there's nothing. And that's a challenge to do that. We all, you know, I suffer. I mean, that's a hard thing to surmount. And, you know,
Without this tendency for human beings to assign meaning, let's say, to anything that or everything that happens, right? As a magician, you wouldn't have anything to work with.
exactly. You need those, right. We need to have stop signs. We need to have certain, meanings to allow us to participate in the world without, you know, getting hit by another car. I mean, so those labels are very, very, very important. Um, but like you're saying, it's like, but now, I don't know, defining your individuality with a label is almost, it's almost hypocritical. I mean, or it's
Hmm.
more, it's because now all of a sudden you're not in it, so. And that's where I think that going back to the previous conversation, just that, I think that's a huge topic on itself. You can spend hours. I think a lot of issues with AI is it's an attack on individuality, where I think that to have that ability off to outsource, our conflict or outsource our pain or suffering or in developing art, we are missing that whole journey that defines our individual selves. And and I think as a tool, if you are, we can use a tool as a tool well, but then there's that seduction, you know, to just, I mean, I just, I'll go to a hardware store and ask where something is, and the person pulls out a app, and
Hmm.
it's like, well, twofold. It's like, well, I can do that, so I don't need
Hmm.
you. But more important, don't you want to know where this
Hmm.
is? Don't
Hmm.
you want to be? And
Hmm.
I think that lack of, I don't know, I just find that, my wife and I talk about it a lot, which she had a wonderful interview with you, but, really enjoyed that, by the way. Um, is that, I don't know. It's all the work, I guess, the work,
The good thing about what you just said is that basically we have a new chance to define. and like sort of redefine what humanity is. Like we can see
Right,
that. Like
right.
wouldn't you, like what you said, wouldn't you want to know where that thing is? Basically just means that that guy who pulls up the app just is in the wrong place.
And I mean how and the proverbial of like I wish I won the lottery. And what would you do if you won? Well, I'd lay on a beach for the rest of my life with umbrellas and my drink. Okay. And it's like, to me, it's like that is people's goals. That's what they're not, and maybe that's what they're supposed to do with their mystical reason why they're on the planet. And I'm not judging that, but at the same time, you know, um, I think that, you know, giving those gifts, and once again, it goes back to AI. You're giving that those tools to basically sit on your couch and have your whole life, and you know it's almost an omnipotent power, which brings a whole other, why what makes I think a great artist is going back to the original conversation is how do you work with those mistakes and those happy accidents, and how do you surmount those, and how do you take that improvisational aspect, and what do you do with that? And to me, that's the package. It's not that you made a mistake, it's what you did with it. And there's a lot of beauty in that, of just like I guess to me, maybe like almost like a theatrical drama. The music is creating, a place, and you went to someplace else, and then you surmount it, and there's a lot of takings up in that. And I think that's very intriguing to me. You know, how do you sculpt that? And
Yeah, this kind of like leads me to a question I wanted to ask even earlier already. Um, so your love for Houdini, the fact that you are, or you said used to be a practicing magician, um, it did this knowledge, let's just call it knowledge and skill, did this put you in a new position with what you are already, I think you called it mystery. Like,
um,
do you know what I mean? Like, is there a second tier mystery or a third tier mystery? Like, once you
that's
once you could look behind the, you know what I mean? Like, you know more than a lot of people.
well, no, see, that's where there's a lot of problems I've had with being a magician.
Hmm.
Is I did not get into magic through a tremendous amount of magic. Like magic is huge now, humongous, but it's all hugely YouTube sleight of hand.
Hmm.
Very few people are learning how to put on a show.
Hmm.
Million, tens of millions of people can do card tricks or amazing manipulations with their fingers or coins or credit card or whatever they're using, but can they put on a show? Um, and anyway, I got into magic because I liked building illusions. I just thought it was cool. I had no interest in fooling people with these. I myself would build like a Pepper's ghost in my basement. I remember getting glass and working with the lights, and or black art, or I just was fascinated with that aspect of it. And when I got into magic as a performing artist, um, my attitude was, hey, there's a lot of cool stuff. I want to share this. This is really cool.
Hmm.
Not nothing nothing at all. In fact, I always feel I don't, um, I mean, I was a martial artist as well. I mean, I was all through high school and college, I competed, and it was in my life for quite a long time. And, but whenever I would win a tournament, there was always it was never like, wow, yeah, got you, it was always like almost an embarrassment, you
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
it was like
Hmm.
that. I don't know if that's the correct word. So in magic, um, that's where I found that maybe I'm misplaced. In fact, my mentor, who was a very, very well-known, very successful corporate performer, a guy named Denny Haney, was actually in the 80s. He was the highest paid corporate individual in the country, and not just magician.
Hmm.
Um, and I remember he was a very soulful guy, and we would have these discussions like, why magic? I remember he took a piano up when he was like in his 40s because he was like, because what you're asking at the beginning, going to those different levels, surmounting that adversarial, part of magic is a real challenge, whereas music can do that. I remember talking to him about, you know, decades ago about God, I would love to see a magic show that's as powerful as a Pink Floyd,
Hmm.
performance that just lifts you up with those lights and sounds. And he just said that there's no magic show that can do that, period. And so, maybe I'm a misplaced magician in certain ways. So, but I have found that within magic, I can be the magician and get to those cool places doing kid shows. Initially, when you get into magic, if you really work hard at magic, you can become a snob. Oh, I do the sleight of hand, and I do just adult shows, and I do high-end corporate, whatever, blah, 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 blah. But I never, a lot of times you don't get anything back from that. Because like, you do a corporate show and half the people there don't want to be there. They had their
Hmm.
award ceremony. They want to go out and drink. They don't want to see me, you know,
Hmm.
so that you don't have that built in. But doing kid shows, oh, you're a kid's performer. Well, David Copperfield performed for kids and he's worth $1 billion. The most famous magicians perform for kids and so I get that there. But then the other extreme, if interacting more of my intellectual, I'm getting more into lecturing and that's been fulfilling.
Hmm.
So in a roundabout way, going back to your initial point of that magic within the magic, um, that's really tough to do because you're coming out as a performer that is supposed to want to fool you, not educate you, not, transform you, not, inspire you, but you do inspire kids. I've got tons of kids come up to, oh, hey, how did you do that? Okay, well, I go to the library and these things called books. Maybe look into that, and they're open. They're not seeing that. They're not
Hmm.
going to that, adversarial mentality. And some adults are like that too. But I guess what I'm saying is um, getting to that point of the mystery within the mystery and getting to that is, at least for me, has always been a big frustration and challenge because also most of the people in magic, uh, hobbyists and whatnot, um, you know they're not doing it for intellectual reasons. They're doing it because it's a hobby, and there's nothing wrong with being a hobbyist. This is great, but it's like how many in your industry, I mean, a Stratocaster guitar would be $50,000 if it wasn't for the hobbyists buying them, you know,
Hmm.
because
Hmm.
we couldn't make enough. So, um,
I really I think I get what you're saying. However,
I, you know, we talked about,
my question, and somehow I think I hit on something here because like it's very clear.
probably,
You want to make your position clear, and I understand, totally understand. I get it,
yeah,
and I believe you. My question is, like, because you are effectively training your senses. Like you're not only training your body to do things, but you're also training your senses. You're training
right.
yourself in order to keep the focus and to be able to execute like a pretty long choreography, let's say, things like that. So, which I think it's unavoidable. Like maybe you're right. Like if somebody's not intellectual, they will not think about this. But even for those people, it's kind of unavoidable that they sort of like shift their mental state in some way. They don't have to be
Yeah, I
aware of
think
it.
I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yes and no. I think there's certain people, adults, huge amount of kids. And I'll tell you a little story about that. Um, that will allow themselves, but once again, a lot of adults treat the performance as an attack, and they're
Hmm.
protective. They're not
I see.
looking for, so in other words, you know, um, I'm going to get you. That's my job. No, you're not. I'm going to, okay. Oh God, you got me. So
Hmm.
it's kind
Hmm.
of simple as
Hmm.
that. But,
Hmm.
I remember doing a show it was an outdoor performance. Actually, I was just set up in a booth. I can't remember. It was for a big, I don't know, can't remember what the festival was. And I would do like sort of street performing. And I remember there was a father and child. And I think the father, the son, I don't know what mental issues he had, but I remember I did what was known as a sucker trick, is that you basically put a card down and they think you're putting the ace of spades down, but you really switched it with something else. And there's a reveal at the end of like, oh no, it's not the ace of spades, it's the queen of hearts. And I remember the kid was like, no, I saw him put the ace of spades there. And the father had to take him away
Hmm.
because he was so angered by that.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
that really rattled me. I
Hmm.
mean, it was like, he was really upset. This was not a very upset, and but as far as
I think
what
I've
you're
seen
saying
this
about,
happen. I've seen this happen to animals even. Like there's some people on Facebook. They post videos of little magic tricks they do with dogs or something, and sometimes the dog really goes crazy because it doesn't like or he doesn't understand what's going on. It's
right, or that they don't have that ability to be embrace the fact that this is just a trick, this
yes,
is reality, and it's a big threat. So I
yeah.
guess, um, and I know maybe I'm a little off topic of what you're trying to bring up, but it does strike a lot of chords in me because um, ultimately, what I would want out of a show is people coming out of a feeling of, you know, of a seeing a wonderful uh, artistic performance, whether it's a play or a musical, whatever, where people are walking out going, whoa, that was, I got, the world's a more beautiful place. And wow, there's this, they brought something to the table that really, inspired me. And, um, and that's not to say that what I do is wrong at all. It just,
Hmm.
for me personally, um, it's a challenge because, there are sort of ways of working around that. And that's sort of pitching the craft as I don't have any magical abilities at all, but I'm in touch with some things that do.
Hmm.
And I'm not fully in touch with it because I can screw up with it. So it's a
Hmm.
balance of, you know, okay, okay, oh God, okay, God. And also, like, especially with kids, by pointing the kids up and empowering the kids to do the trick. Oh my God, how did you do that? And saying, hey, I didn't do it. That was you, you know. And that's been kind of a little out for myself. So I hope I'm not circling around too much, but
No,
um,
no.
you know, it's
Uh, let me throw one more thing into this
sure.
conversation. So, what is it like for you to watch other magicians like a show? Like, what happens when you watch a show that somebody else does?
Once again, I think I actually wrote a book about biography and so he was the David Copperfield of the day, a magician named Alexander Herman, and he if you imagine in your brain what a magician looks like, this tall, thin guy with a top hat and Mephistopheles and has maybe a French accent, that's Alexander Herman. He
Okay.
defined that. And
Uh-huh.
he was a household name. Um, but I'm thinking, uh, when he passed on, his wife actually took on the show. She was the first megastar female magician, Adelaide Herman. And she was asked, what's the most important trait of a magician? And she said, personality by far. Personality by far. Now, most people get into magic because magic is a very, it's amazing how many comics start off as magicians and they kind of got, they did their magic and they realize, oh, I don't need to do the magic anymore. you know, you know, it's me. I'm, Johnny Carson, Steve Martin.
Mhm.
There's a huge list. And, so going back to your question, um, you know, um, if it's a magician who did really cool props, that's really cool. I can get it. Oh my God, that's really fascinating. Or once again, it all goes into you know, the personality of the performer. And if the person magician doesn't have a great personality, and I can kind of, a lot of mentalists, mind readers became mentalists because they were originally magicians. They didn't have to schlep around all this stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. And problem is, a lot of them aren't good talkers.
Mhm.
And so if I see a certain acts as a magician, I know what you're setting up. And you don't have the personality to make entertain me in between that. you know,
Yes,
that's not a good thing. So, but the magicians that do have wonderful personalities and um, combine that with the craftsmanship, because it sort of goes back to the beginning about that audience relationship, because you need to have a personality for that, and to be a
yes.
good talking magician, unless you're a, a spectacle magician and just showing off things. Um, if I do see that combination between a great personality, like my mentor had that, and being a good craftsman, um, that's very inspirational to me. But that's not very common in magic,
Hmm. Hmm.
because um, if I go and buy I guess at the time it would have been a player piano. Now it could just be a button to press and get some samples down and put it on the side and say I'm a musician. Okay. Well, a lot of magic's like that. Hey, I went to a magic shop. I got the box. I pressed the button. I'm a magician. Magician.
Hmm. Hmm.
And a
Hmm.
tremendous amount of people get into magic like that. A lot of them use that as a platform to grow and become beyond that, but a lot of them don't. And that want to grow beyond that is something that and I know I'm talking a lot in circles, but there, and I think you can sense there's always been a lot of frustration being
Hmm.
a magician and at the same time wanting to be an artist at the
Hmm.
same time. And
Hmm.
it's a very challenging thing to be a magician and to be an artist in ways that you're talking about because of the going back to everything that you were bringing up about, how do people take, nonverbals, um, who's your audience, and
I mean,
it's a big challenge.
what you're saying to me makes a whole lot of sense because, like, I just assume that within the and I don't even know which word you guys use. Is it a trick or like what do you call the thing that you do in order to create the illusion? There is like a what I call choreography earlier. There's like the routine or whatever, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
within a routine for it to be successful in the sense in the way that it's intended to be, it needs to be executed with accuracy. I assume in most cases.
Accuracy and being a really good bullshitter.
Yes, yes,
Okay, and we're basically you're basically a con man.
yeah.
And you're and playing those highs and lows. You do something that's very, I take this guitar pick and I vanish it, whatever. Um, when people are going, whoa,
Mhm.
there's a little lull there, and I can sneak something in, that they don't even know is coming through the back door. I think there was a famous expose sort of on that where a magician was doing, uh, I can't, I think he, I think, I can't remember who it was, where he took a handkerchief and said, it was like a blue handkerchief and said, watch, I'm going to turn it red.
Mhm.
Okay. And he showed it. And then he had this scantily clad woman walk across the stage, you know, and once you had that, they looked back and it was red, changed it, so that setup, in subtle ways is
Uh-huh.
very interesting. But once again, it hits that what is your goal? Your goal is to fool somebody.
Mhm.
It is
Mhm.
that is the
Mhm.
goal, you
So
know?
that's why in the end, like what you were saying, like if a magician drops the the materials he's working with and the trick itself, what remains is the personality, let's say, is the communication and is the timing of communication, right? So and then in the end you're at like it's either an actor or a comic or
Well,
right.
good. That's an excellent point. The father of modern magic, Robert Houdin, um, who Houdini took his name from.
Mm-hmm.
Um, uh,
Who that?
Houdin, yeah, Houd, yeah, and he said a magician is an actor playing the part of a magician.
Uh-huh, yeah. Yeah.
And so and
So
that's
does
the
that
second.
does that apply to musicians too? What do you think?
What do you mean as far
That
as
same thinking that basically the musician is acting the musician. The musician is not necessarily just the musician. It could be an actor acting as
yeah.
a musician.
Well, that's why I think that's where I think is very important, um, to develop the trade aspect as well. Because if you know, you can, you have areas, and that's why as a magician, I worked a lot on, what they call manipulation, making cards that disappear, coin rolls, all that kind of stuff. Just say, there's some skill in that. And that's a very important thing, at least to me, to be a magician, because that in their mind, when you deal with your phalanges and your audience goes, oh, I can relate to that, but I can't do that. Whereas if I just bring out boxes, well, if I just bought that box, I could do that. So I think that having that balance of the tradesman aspect, and as a trade person, um, as a musician, that's a huge part. And um, there's but that's another interesting point about magic. Why it's a very unique art is, if you're a musician and I'm playing a today, whatever, and I flub a note and I cover it, the person's going to go, not going to go, oh, that guy sucks, because I was supposed to see to C and he hit a G. I mean, what, let's get out of here. It's like, well, okay, yeah, but my God, look what he did. But magic, a tremendous amount of magic, you're not supposed to see the developed talent, all that craftsmanship of doing things, and boom, that might take in decades to, you're not supposed to see that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, if I mess up, oh my God, there's the coin. I saw that little flash. Oh,
Yeah.
he sucks. So it's a weird thing where that talent is not on the forefront, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and
Mm-hmm.
that's all. And that's where there's a lot of insider camaraderie with very, very good magicians, because they can respect that, know that, and they know the journey they had to go to get that.
So in order not to be like lonely, let's say, do you have that? Is that the reason why you have like circles where you guys meet and practice together, or?
Well, and that is the problem with magic, is there are most magicians are hobbyists.
Mm.
Now that's also a dying thing too, because the it's not being replaced by younger generation, quite honestly, like so many clubs and so many things. But traditionally, most magicians that formed the clubs, there's one SAM, Society of American Magicians, that was started by Houdini, and that was started under the auspice of professionals getting together and talking about their craft, because it was a very protected craft back there. You would have magicians because at that time, magic was on Broadway. It was competing against the highest artistic theatrical presentations of the day. So these people were really good. And they were also very protective of their art. So there's countless stories about people sneaking in and going backstage or underneath there and seeing how they did it so they can steal their, that effect. Um, but anyway, um, what happened in magic was once basically television hit, um, you might have done the same act your whole life, but then you go on television. It's like, okay, what else can you do? Okay, whatever. But that act is so well crafted. There's so many things about that. So anyway, what happened in a nutshell is magic really degraded hugely into a hobbyist art.
Hmm.
Okay, where it was picked up hugely by the hobbyists. And once again, I'm not, that's a great thing. I mean, I have my hobbies and I would never, you know, but I think it lost that backboard of performing, of out there on the road and all those things that would get to you, those actualized places of being a consummate professional, which originally what how we start. So what's happened is if you are really a magician that's really into the intellectual artistic aspects of it, um, it's lonely because most of the hobbyist groups are not, that's not what their motivations are. It's not. So it can be a very lonely crowd. And that's why, like my going back to my mentor who passed away a number of years ago, he had a shop and he kind of pseudo retired, just opened a magic shop in Baltimore, which was one of the top in the world. He also had one in Las Vegas. And Michael Jackson would come there and other, star. He was really well known. And he said when he gets old, what he wants to do is just retire to Las Vegas and talk war stories with other professionals, you know, and that bond. But once again, magic is not a hugely popular art. So as a musician, you could probably find local singer-songwriter groups or whatever to get to those places where magic is, if you're into magic, and I'm not trying not to be pretentious, but really as that artistic pushing the and being it can be lonely. Very, and I've always had a problem with that.
Yeah, I can see how it's problematic, but it's also even like more fascinating because of that. Because you really have to integrate like the extremes in order to actually be like you say, a performer. Like for hobbyists that would be different, but you would really have to both live with the loneliness and being in the limelight, like both extremes would have to be 50-50
Well,
in
and
you.
like I guess the classic case of the guitar player is, and this, and once again, and nothing I'm saying is wrong, but it's also,
Mm.
um, if you just played something and the person comes up to you and go, "Oh my God, what was your inspiration for that? Because it really moved me, blah, 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 blah." And that would be a wonderful conversation. But if they come up and go, what gauge strings do you use?
Yeah, happens
I
all the
mean,
time.
exactly. And that's a valid thing to ask. But it's the same time, it's like, um, you know, that's not what we really ultimately. And it's funny in music is when I got into recording a digital world, I got very anal about it, and it was like, oh my gosh, they're only 16-bit, and this is it should be recording at 24, 40, 48, and then
Hmm.
not 44.1, blah 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 blah. And then you meet a musician who's like, I think I was looking at some documentary with Cindy, my wife, on Paul McCartney, and it was like when he was doing Ram, he just went outside and put a recorder and produced talk. I don't care. It's like, this sounds fine. You can hear me. You can sound
Yeah.
cuts through the mix.
Yes.
Shut
Yes.
up.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
So I can
Yeah.
totally relate to that.
So let's sort of like come to an end. I want to just tell this little story. Like while I was like at the front of the Allen Theater, you have in the front you have a bookstore, you have musical instruments, you have CDs, you have
Mhm.
vinyl,
Yep.
and actually the very first item that my eyes met, it was way before I knew that you were a magician, right? Was the film The Prestige.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah,
And
I like that a lot. That was a really that came out at the same time as another show called a movie called The Illusionist with Edward Norton. But yeah,
yeah,
and the book is really amazing. A different
I
ending.
can imagine it's really like the film. And now, like having talked to you, I can actually see how much deeper and more meaningful that film actually is to a magician, to like understand what the sacrifice that these guys kind of like take on them.
Especially back in that day. And that's what I was talking about earlier. It's that perfect example you brought to the table is that movie really showed that the competitiveness of, there's countless stories of, somebody performing an effect in Europe and they're about ready to come and bring their major effect to all the houses in the United States, but somebody snuck in there and stole it, and they did it first, and
Hmm.
they trumped them. So they come in and go, oh, we've seen that, and yeah, so it was very competitive, very close. It was a very closed circle of secrets where that was your life. You can't let this out, because this is beyond your life. It's your it's your pragmatic, it's your sustenance, it's
And
just your
your
it's your
dirty little
moneymaker.
secret, dirty little
I mean,
secret.
there's all kinds of not I mean I don't know. Houdini as an example, when his he was very attached to his mother, and when his mother died, he shut down, and he went, and at the time spiritualism was a huge religion, and
Hmm.
he went to contact the dead, and he saw right through it. And he kept on
Hmm.
going. He's seen all these charlatans and charlatans and charlatans. Eventually got so angered that he was like, he actually wrote a book called, who demystify, many books on taking as. So I won't go into the full intrigue, but there's some conspiracy theorists that think that he was murdered by the spiritualist community because he
Hmm.
was very bad for business.
Hmm.
So
And that's really what my question earlier on was about. Like, in how far do you see trickery in the world? Because you kind of like your schools to actually see tricks and illusions.
yes,
You kind of expect them more, I would think, than the normal layman, let's say, right?
I think that's a good point, and that's an interesting thing that maybe there's certain aspects of magic that should be taught almost in the school system, because
Hmm.
um, I think healthy cynicism is a very important part of being any kind of culture, and not taking things at, once again, at face value. Like, once again, I'm not, you now at the point where you turn on anything on the internet, and how do we have no idea if that's true or not. So coming into any situation now, especially online, we need to have that ability to have a little bit of, okay, wait, that doesn't feel quite right here. My wife Cindy, as you know, is a psychologist. We talk about this a lot, about and gaining those skill sets, and yeah, magic is very much about uh, being aware. It's very close to martial arts,
Hmm.
because you need to develop the awareness, but not looking as if you're aware.
Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
So, So it's
And
like,
it's the same for great musicians. Let's say it's very very similar.
as far as like
The the how shall I say, like the appearance versus how should I say this? So for example, like I play and I practiced, let's say, 50,000 hours in my life or whatever, like something like
right,
that, right? But in the moment that I go on stage, it just does not, on one hand, it doesn't really matter, it doesn't play any role, and I can kind of like become oblivious to the idea that it actually has an effect, that the fact what I did, who I've become, and I didn't, like, when I chose to go that path, I didn't know what I was going to become, who I was going to be. And
okay.
I go on stage, I present myself, and sort of like in most cases I would say, like, I'm unprepared for the avalanche of projection, of sort of like maybe even spiritual and religious experiences that people may have with the music, where everything is just sort of like everything is becomes loose, or like you could say gates are opening, or like
I
everything
know,
is
I know
be
exactly what you're talking about. And I think that it's almost like the mentality of like drumming circles where you have a rhythm going, which avails your mind to go someplace else. But that for somebody like you can't avail yourself to that, opening yourself to something out without that ability to have that foundation of craftsmanship. So you don't have to be working on flubbing, to my flat, you're just flowing. But that part of your brain maybe, since you're a consummate craftsman in what you do, avails yourself to put that on autopilot so you can basically, experience the spiritual something mysterious dimension that I think ultimately what, I guess all artists are looking for is that, we're not alone and we're part of something bigger. And that part of bigger is really something, um, I get a glimpse of something that, whoa, there's something cool going on, I don't know.
I think I have learned a lot from our conversation. In particular, I would say like that the crafts and the arts, let's say, like there is like, and you were saying yourself that you are hoping, or you're wishing, you want to be an artist, right? Like you said that. We
Yeah,
could go
I
back, and
guess
you
I,
said something like
right. And
that.
that's
So,
such a
but
that's
but
such a horrible word. I mean,
I know, but it's
but
but it's true, and it makes sense. But I'm realizing that within your realm, it is really, there's really like a, like almost like a line drawn, where, okay, like I can be an illusionist, like my craft can be like top, but in order to be an artist, I need to be something that is not the craft.
right, right.
I need to have like the charisma or the communication skills, or you used a lot of words for that. But I think there's like, it's very clear that it's not the same thing.
And that's why we're talking about the beginning. That's why, once again, that Venn diagram of commonality, I have much more in common with you than I do with a hobbyist magician.
Yes.
Much
Yes.
more. It's almost
Yes.
like the media doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It's not the media. It's the that's just whatever particularly path you've chosen to develop to. What's that saying? I think it's like a Jewish mysticism saying that there's many ladders to heaven, something like that,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you know, which I thought kind of resonated.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's fascinating. Thank you so much. I think you really, I have learned a lot, and I'm always like, I might not always, but I'm really happy when I meet somebody to have a conversation with, like you,
Oh
where
yeah.
where 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 there's an actual sort of like insight for me, that kind of even helps me relax, let's say. In a
You know,
way.
and I can just be very closed up. And meeting somebody like you, I know that, you know, we could blink our eyes and it's 4 in the morning, you know. So,
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
know, so
Michael,
thanks so much.
thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much, and I'm sure we'll talk again. And
Very
I'm
much look forward to that.
yeah, thank you so much, and bye bye.
See you later.